It happened on a day that should have been forgettable. Ordinary. The kind of day you move through on autopilot, not realizing it will end up being etched into your memory forever. I woke up late, rushed through breakfast, and told myself I was just tired. I had been working too many shifts, skipping meals, ignoring the dull ache in my chest that had been creeping up for weeks. Stress, I thought. That was all. Stress. At the office, I smiled at my coworkers like nothing was wrong. I even laughed at a silly joke one of them made about my messy handwriting. For a few moments, I convinced myself that I was fine. But as the hours passed, the pressure in my chest grew heavier, like invisible hands were pressing down on me. I brushed it off, again and again, because that's what I had always done. Push through, keep going, don't complain. That's who I was. But then everything shifted in a single moment. I stood up from my desk, and the world tilted. My vision blurred. The floor seemed to sink beneath my feet, and my heart thudded violently inside my ribcage. A searing pain ripped through me, sharp and merciless. My knees buckled, and before I could stop myself, I collapsed onto the cold tiles. Voices blurred around me, panicked shouts, footsteps running closer. Someone grabbed my hand, someone else called for help. And all I could think, as I lay there gasping, was, "This can't be happening to me." The next minutes felt like hours. The ceiling lights spun above me as paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher. The piercing wail of the siren filled the air as the ambulance raced through the city. My body trembled uncontrollably. Fear clawed its way up my throat, threatening to choke me. I tried to focus on the sound of my own breathing, shallow, uneven, desperate. I remember the paramedic's voice, calm but firm. "Stay with us. Keep your eyes open." I wanted to answer, but my lips wouldn't form words. My mind drifted between darkness and light, slipping away, fighting to hold on. The city blurred past the ambulance windows, tall buildings, familiar streets, people living their ordinary lives, and I felt like I was being pulled into another world, one I hadn't asked to enter. When we finally burst through the hospital doors, the smell of antiseptic hit me, harsh and sterile. Nurses swarmed around, their voices a chorus of instructions I couldn't fully understand. Needles pierced my skin. Machines beeped in a rhythm that didn't match the frantic pounding of my heart. Someone placed an oxygen mask over my face, and for a brief second, I thought I might not wake up again. But I did. Hours later, in a dim hospital room, I opened my eyes to the faint hum of machines keeping track of me. My body ached as though it had been through war. And in a way, it had. I stared at the ceiling, fear pressing against my ribs, and one thought echoed louder than the beeping monitors. Something is terribly wrong. My life will never be the same after this. That was the beginning, the moment everything I thought I knew about love, family, and survival began to unravel. When the doctor walked into my hospital room the next morning, I knew, before she even opened her mouth, that something was wrong. It was the way she held the chart against her chest, the way her eyes softened with pity, the way her footsteps slowed as if each one carried the weight of news she didn't want to deliver. I sat up a little straighter, my heart racing faster than the monitor beside me. "Just tell me," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, cracked, fragile, like it belonged to someone else. She pulled up a chair and sat close to the bed. That was the moment I truly felt fear, not because of the pain in my chest, but because doctors don't sit like that unless it's serious. Unless it's life-changing. "You have lymphoma," she said gently. "Stage 3. It's aggressive." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hovered in the sterile air between us. Lymphoma. Aggressive. Stage 3. My brain tried to connect the pieces, but they floated just out of reach. "No, that can't be," I stammered. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I I just fainted. I was stressed. I can't. My words trailed off, lost beneath the weight of reality crashing down on me. Her eyes didn't waver. We need to start chemotherapy as soon as possible. You'll be here for months. Months? The word slammed into me like a punch. I couldn't process anything beyond it. Months in a hospital bed. Months of drugs, pain, nausea. Months of being someone who wasn't me anymore. Tears burned in my eyes. I tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed to break down in front of her. But the sobs came anyway. Sharp, raw, unstoppable. The doctor rested her hand lightly on mine, but there was nothing she could say to soften the truth. When she left, I stared at the blank wall across from me. I thought about everything I still hadn't done, the trips I hadn't taken, the dreams I had put off for someday, the love I was still waiting to find. And suddenly, someday felt like a cruel joke. The first person I called was my mother. The moment I heard her voice, the dam broke again. I could barely form the words. Mom, it's cancer. There was silence on the other end, the kind that stretches too long, the kind that confirms your worst fears. Then she whispered, I'll come right away. For the first few days, my family surrounded me. My parents sat at my bedside, holding my hands, whispering promises that I wouldn't go through this alone. My brother brought flowers. My sister brought books, as if stories could shield me from my own. And for a little while, I believed them. I believed in us. But deep down, a small, aching voice whispered something else. Promises are easy in the beginning. The real test is what happens when things get hard. I didn't know it then, but that test was coming, and my family. They were about to fail it in ways I could never have imagined. The first 3 weeks in the hospital felt almost bearable because my family was there. My mother brought me soup in little thermoses, even though I could barely keep anything down. My father sat stiffly in the corner, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to cry when he thought I wasn't looking. My brother, Daniel, cracked awkward jokes to lighten the mood, while my sister, Anna, read to me when the silence grew too heavy. It wasn't perfect, but it was presence, and presence meant everything. Then, little by little, things started to change. It began with Daniel. He had been engaged for over a year, and his wedding was coming up in July. One evening, he leaned against the doorframe of my hospital room, his face carefully blank, like he had rehearsed what he was about to say. I can't stay much longer, he admitted, not quite meeting my eyes. The honeymoon trip is already paid for. Europe, 2 months, non-refundable. You know how expensive it was. His words trailed off, as if waiting for me to absolve him. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Of course, I said. Go. Don't worry about me. But inside, something broke. A week later, Anna came in with her acceptance letter to a master's program. She was glowing with pride, and I wanted so badly to share her joy, to clap and hug her like I normally would. But then she said the words, It starts in March. I'll have to move to Sao Paulo. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That's amazing, Anna. I'm proud of you. And I was proud, but I was also terrified. The walls of my hospital room were beginning to feel like prison bars, and the thought of being left alone behind them gnawed at me. My parents were the last to shift. They had stayed longer than the others, holding my hand through the worst of the nausea and fever, telling me bedtime stories like they used to when I was a child. But by the end of February, they too began to falter. One night, my mother sat at my bedside, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sweater. Your father and we've been talking. We thought maybe we could take a short trip. Just a few weeks. You're safe here, with the doctors and nurses. And honestly, after everything, we're exhausted. We need a break. I stared at her, numb. A break. From me. From my cancer. I wanted to scream, to beg, to demand that they stay, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "If that's what you need." And so, one by one, they left. My brother to his honeymoon, my sister to her new future, my parents to the sunlit beaches of the Northeast. I stayed, alone. The beeping of machines became my only lullaby, the sterile smell of antiseptic my only companion. Nurses did their best, but they couldn't replace the warmth of a hand held through the night. Promises had been made, promises had been broken. And as I lay there, chemo dripping into my veins, I realized the cruelest truth. When the world gets heavy, some people don't carry it with you. They walk away. The first night without my family was the longest of my life. The hospital felt different, too quiet. Even though the monitors beeped, even though nurses bustled in and out, something essential was missing. The soft hum of my mother's voice, the familiar weight of my father's silence, the sound of my siblings bickering in the corner. Now, there was only emptiness. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them over and over, trying to pretend I wasn't terrified. Every shadow in the hallway seemed darker. Every groan from the patient next door echoed louder. Without family, the sterile white walls felt like they were closing in on me. By midnight, the nausea hit hard. My body shook, sweat soaking through the thin hospital gown. I pressed the call button, and a nurse rushed in, adjusting my IV and wiping my forehead with a cool cloth. She smiled kindly, but when she left, the silence swallowed me again. It wasn't her fault. Nurses couldn't sit by my side all night, but my family could have. The next day blurred into the next, and then the next. Days marked not by calendars, but by chemo sessions and blood test results. I learned quickly that in hospitals, time bends. Hours stretch painfully long, yet weeks vanish without warning. Friends came by sometimes, but their lives were still moving. Work, relationships, plans. They had things to return to. I didn't. There was only one exception. Julia, my best friend. She was there in a way my own blood wasn't. She brought books, snacks I couldn't eat but appreciated, stories that made me laugh even when my body felt like it was shutting down. On nights when I couldn't bear the silence, she dragged a blanket into the recliner and slept beside me, one hand resting on mine. "Family isn't always blood," she whispered once, when she caught me staring at the door my parents used to walk through. I wanted to believe her. I wanted her words to fill the hollow inside me. But the truth? The abandonment stung too deeply. I had given so much to my family. The house we lived in was mine. I had paid for most of it. Bills, groceries, little emergencies. I had always been the one patching holes in their lives. And when the time came for them to patch mine, they vanished. At night, when the ward was quiet and sleep refused to come, I found myself replaying their excuses. Daniel's honeymoon, Anna's studies, my parents' need for a break. Excuses that sounded reasonable on paper, but in my veins, mixed with the poison of chemo, they felt like betrayal. The loneliness didn't just weigh on me, it began to change me. For the first time in my life, I questioned whether I truly belonged to them. Whether family was just a word, a title, an illusion we cling to until reality strips it away. I remember one night, gripping the hospital railing, whispering into the empty room, "If I survive this, I will never see them the same way again." And in that moment, I knew the cancer wasn't the only thing I was fighting. 3 months. That's how long it had been since my family last set foot in the hospital. At first, I clung to the idea that they were busy, that they would come back. But as the weeks dragged on, the reality became undeniable. I had been replaced by their vacations, their careers, their plans. I was no longer a priority. One morning in May, I woke up feeling different. Not stronger. My body was still frail, ravaged by chemotherapy, but sharper. My mind, dulled for weeks by grief and medication, suddenly cut through the fog with a single piercing thought. They left me, but I don't have to wait here for them to return. That realization burned inside me, fueling something dangerous and powerful. Anger, yes, but also liberation. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old bank transfers, bills, and reminders. Line after line of transactions where my money had saved them, supported them, carried them. Rent, utilities, emergency expenses, vacations. My stomach twisted with each reminder. I had built the life they enjoyed, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, and they had left me to rot in a hospital bed. That afternoon, I called a real estate agency. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I explained. I wanted to sell my house. Our house. The place they all believed was ours, when in truth, it had always been mine. The realtor, a brisk woman named Clara, came to the hospital the following week with papers. I signed them in bed, IV still in my arm, the chemo dripping into me like poison and salvation at the same time. By June, the deal was done. 400,000 Rs transferred to my account. Just like that, the roof over their heads was gone. I didn't stop there. I canceled the additional credit cards I had given them for emergencies. I cut off payments for bills that weren't in my name. I even changed the Wi-Fi password. Petty? Maybe. But each click, each signature, each decision felt like reclaiming pieces of myself they had stolen. For the first time in months, I smiled. I imagined their faces when they returned. The key turning in the lock that no longer belonged to them. The strangers now living inside. The panic rising when they realized they had nowhere to go. It wasn't just revenge. It was balance. As my hair thinned and my skin grew pale, I clung to that vision. It gave me a reason to endure the nausea, the fevers, the nights of silent crying. If cancer was teaching me anything, it was this. Life is too short to waste on people who see you as disposable. Julia noticed the change in me. "You're different," she said one night, adjusting the blanket over my legs. "I'm done waiting," I whispered. "If they can leave me behind, I can leave them too." And in that moment, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't known in months. Freedom. October arrived with the quietness of falling leaves. By then, my body was battered but alive, my treatments nearing completion. I had moved into a small apartment nobody in my family knew about, a place with one bedroom, white walls, and a window that let in just enough sunlight to make me feel like the world hadn't entirely abandoned me. I was sitting on that very windowsill when my old phone buzzed for the first time in months. The caller ID. Bruno. My brother. I let it ring until the screen went dark, then let out a laugh so bitter it startled even me. He hadn't called for 3 months, and now, suddenly, he remembered I existed. I didn't pick up. The next day, my phone rang again, and this time I answered. "Carla?" His voice was frantic. "Where are you? What happened to the house? I went there this morning and there are strangers living there. They said they bought it." I smiled to myself, picturing his panicked face. "Yes," I said softly. "The house is gone. I sold it." "What?" His voice cracked. "You can't be serious. Where are Mom and Dad supposed to live? Where am I supposed to—" "Not my problem, Bruno." I cut him off before he could keep whining. "The Carla you knew doesn't exist anymore." And I hung up. For a few blissful minutes, I just sat there, staring out the window, listening to the silence. For once, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was liberating. But Bruno's panic was only the beginning. A week later, my old phone practically buzzed itself off the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls. My parents had returned from their trip in the Northeast to find the same nightmare. No house, no daughter waiting at the hospital bed, no warm welcome. just strangers living inside their old life. My father's messages were furious, demanding explanations. My mother's were desperate, full of apologies that came far too late. And my sister Letitia, oh, she was the last one to return, dragging her suitcase into chaos. By then, the whole family was in meltdown. They went to the police, to the hospital, to every relative they could think of. My name was whispered in panic across Facebook groups, cousins' chats, even distant family in other states. But no one knew where I was, because I had erased myself from their world. Meanwhile, I watched their desperation from the safety of distance. Julia would send me screenshots of their Facebook posts. Please, if anyone has seen Carla, let us know. We just want to make sure she's safe. Safe. That word almost made me laugh. Where were their concerns for my safety when I was strapped to a hospital bed, vomiting through the night, clinging to life with no one holding my hand? Where was their love then? Now they wanted me back, not because they loved me, but because they had lost the comfort I used to provide. And for the first time in my life, I realized something cold but true. Their panic was my justice. I leaned back, let the phone buzz unanswered, and whispered to myself, now they know what it feels like to be abandoned. By November, the chaos had reached its peak. My family had been back for weeks, and their lives had unraveled faster than I could have imagined. They were living in borrowed rooms, calling everyone they knew, posting desperate pleas online. They went from ignoring me in a hospital bed to acting as if I had vanished off the face of the earth. And I let them. For 3 weeks, I lived quietly in my little apartment, watching from a distance. Julia kept me updated, sending me screenshots of their posts, their comments, their frantic messages to mutual friends. One night, she sent me a video. It was my mother, crying into a phone camera, begging strangers for information. My daughter, Carla. She's missing. Please, if anyone knows where she is, tell us. We just want her back. I stared at the screen, numb. Was this the same woman who had boarded a plane while I lay bald and bruised in a hospital bed? The same woman who had said, "You're being well taken care of there, you'll be fine"? The hypocrisy was suffocating. That was when I knew it was time. Not to forgive. No, not yet. But to confront. So on November 15th, I unlocked my old phone and typed a single message in the family group chat. My hands shook as I pressed send, but my heart felt steady for the first time in months. I'm alive, I'm safe, and I'm healing. Meet me today at 7 p.m. at the Central Square. That was it. No explanations, no details, just enough to set their world on fire. Within 5 minutes, my phone exploded. Calls, messages, pleas, over 100 notifications flooding the screen. I didn't answer a single one. At 6:45 p.m., I made my way to the square. The air was crisp, the street lamps already glowing against the twilight. My heart pounded as I walked, but my steps were steady. And then I saw them. They were already there, all of them. My father pacing, his fists clenched. My mother clutching her purse like a lifeline, her face pale and wet with tears. Bruno standing rigid, jaw tight, eyes darting around. And Letitia, hugging herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The moment they spotted me, chaos erupted. "Carla!" my mother screamed, running toward me. She grabbed me like she was afraid I would dissolve into smoke. My father's face broke into shock and relief all at once. Bruno shouted my name, his voice cracking. Letitia's eyes filled with tears. They surrounded me, bombarding me with questions, apologies, excuses. Words poured out like a flood. Where were you? Why didn't you call? Are you okay? Why did you sell the house? We thought you were dead. For 5 minutes, I let them talk. I let them cry. I let them choke on their own emotions. And then I raised my hand. Enough! The words sliced through the air like a blade. They froze, staring at me as though I were a ghost. I looked at each of them, one by one, my voice calm but colder than they had ever heard it. You want to know where I've been? I was in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, alone, because all of you chose your vacations, your studies, your plans, instead of me. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. For the first time, I saw it in their eyes, the dawning horror of what they had done. The silence in the square felt unbearable. The city moved around us, cars passing, children laughing in the distance, couples strolling hand in hand. But inside that circle of 5 people, time had stopped. My mother's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to speak, but no words came. My father's fists unclenched slowly, his shoulders sagging. Bruno avoided my eyes. Letitia bit her lip so hard I thought she might bleed. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. You want the truth? Here it is. When the doctors told me I needed surgery, when I was weak and scared and clinging to life, every single one of you made a choice. Not one of you stayed. Not one of you said, I'll be here. You left me. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. Bruno finally snapped, his voice sharp. That's not fair, Carla. We thought. You thought. I cut him off, my voice trembling with anger. You thought I'd be fine alone? You thought a stranger in scrubs could give me the love of a family? You thought your own comfort mattered more than my life. Don't you dare tell me what's fair. His face turned red, but he stayed silent. I turned to my mother, who was still crying, tears streaking her makeup. You knew. You were the one I begged. I said, please don't leave me. And you looked at me, smiled, and said, you'll be fine. You traded your daughter for palm trees and sand. How do you justify that? Her lips trembled. Carla, I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, I interrupted, my voice cold. You didn't want to see me weak, because then you'd have to admit how fragile we all are. It was easier to run. My father tried to step in, his voice gruff but shaky. I thought I was doing what was best for the family, keeping us together. I let out a bitter laugh. Together? You call this together? No, Dad. Family isn't about being under the same roof. Family is about who shows up when it matters. And none of you did. Letitia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. I'm sorry. Her honesty cut deeper than the excuses. For a moment, I saw the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching my hand. And yet, that same sister had left me to face my storm alone. I shook my head slowly. You were scared? Imagine how I felt. Imagine lying there, wondering if I'd even wake up, knowing the people I loved most had chosen not to be there. The words hung in the air like a blade. They all stood frozen, unable to answer, unable to escape. I drew in a shaky breath, my voice soft but sharp enough to wound. You keep asking me why I sold the house, why I disappeared. Here's the truth. I had to bury the version of me who believed we were a family, that Carla is gone. What's left of me belongs to me now, not to you. Their faces fell shock, regret, devastation. For once, they weren't the ones in control of the story. And for the first time in months, I felt powerful. The weight of my words lingered in the air long after I spoke them. For a moment, no one moved. My family stood there like statues, faces pale, eyes wide, hearts suddenly bare. It was as if they had finally understood the enormity of what they had done. Then my mother broke first. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, reaching for mine. Carla, please, she whispered. Her voice cracked with desperation. We made a mistake, a terrible one. But we're here now. Can't we fix this? Can't we start over? I stared at her hands, so familiar. The same hands that had braided my hair when I was a child. The same hands that had waved goodbye at the hospital door before she disappeared to the beach. Now they shook, fragile, seeking forgiveness she hadn't earned. I didn't move. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "Carla, we know we failed you. But family is complicated. We thought we were protecting ourselves, but we hurt you instead. Don't let this be the end of us." I almost laughed. The end of us. That end had come months ago, the moment I woke up alone in that sterile hospital room with only strangers by my side. Then Letitia, my sister, stepped closer. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her lip trembling. "I can't stop thinking about that night," she said softly. "When you called me, I told you I'd visit. And then I didn't. I told myself you'd be okay, that it wasn't that serious. But I knew. Deep down, I knew I was abandoning you, and I hate myself for it." Her confession pierced deeper than any excuse. For the first time, I saw regret that felt real. Bruno, my brother, had been silent until now. But finally, he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "I was a coward. I didn't want to see you weak, because then I'd have to face my own weakness. I thought if I pretended everything was normal, it would go away. But it didn't, and I let you down." Their words should have comforted me. Once they would have. But instead, I felt a strange calm. I realized that what I had needed back then wasn't an apology now. It was their presence then. And they couldn't change the past. I looked at each of them slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Do you know what it felt like?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "It felt like dying twice. Once from the illness, and once from the emptiness you left behind. And now you come to me, asking for forgiveness, as if words could erase abandonment." Tears ran down my mother's face. "So what now? Do we lose you forever?" I exhaled, my chest tight but resolute. "No," I said softly. "You already lost me. What you see standing here isn't the daughter, the sister, the little girl who once believed in this family. That version of me died in that hospital bed. What's left is someone who knows better, someone who chooses herself." The silence that followed was deafening. My words had become a verdict, and they all knew it. I turned away, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the pavement, each step carrying me further from the ghosts of who we had been. Behind me, I heard my mother sob, my sister whisper my name, my father's broken voice calling after me. But I didn't look back. For the first time, I wasn't running from them. I was walking toward myself. The night I walked away from my family, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. For years, I had tied my worth to their love, their approval, their presence. And in one brutal night at the hospital, I had learned the truth. Love without action is just an empty word. Families can fail you. Blood can betray you. And survival sometimes means letting go of the people you thought you couldn't live without. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment to a soft golden light seeping through the curtains. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up with a weight on my chest. Instead, I felt possibility. I made coffee slowly, savoring the sound of the kettle, the smell of roasted beans. I realized how long it had been since I had actually tasted life instead of simply enduring it. Each small action, pouring the coffee, opening the window, breathing in the fresh air, felt like proof that I had survived. Later that day, I called Dr. Helena, the nurse who had been by my side in the darkest days of the hospital. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm. "Carla, how are you holding up?" I smiled faintly. "Better. Different. I think I finally understand what you meant. About rebuilding. She chuckled softly. Good. Then let's start with something simple. Have you thought about volunteering? Sometimes the best way to heal is to be what you needed for someone else. Her words lingered in my mind long after we hung up. Being what I had needed. The idea lit something in me. Within a week, I found myself standing in the volunteer office of the same hospital where I had once been a patient. Walking those halls again was terrifying at first, but then I saw them, the patients. Some were alone, their eyes carrying the same loneliness I had once felt. Others had family by their side, but still looked lost in their own battles. I sat by an elderly woman's bed that first day. She was frail, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me about her garden, about the roses she missed, about the silence of her empty house. I didn't have answers, but I held her hand, I listened, and I didn't leave. And as I looked at her, I realized this was the person I had needed back then. Not necessarily my family, not even someone who knew me well, but simply someone who stayed. Weeks turned into months. My days filled with quiet acts of presence, reading books aloud, holding hands, sharing stories, sitting in silence when words weren't enough. And little by little, the broken pieces of me began to knit together, not because my family came back, but because I built a new one. A family of choice, of strangers turned friends, of people who understood that love is action, not promise. One evening, as I walked out of the hospital after a long shift, the city lights glowing in the distance, I paused. The Carla who had once been abandoned in a hospital bed was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived abandonment, betrayal, and loneliness, and who had transformed it into strength. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, this isn't the end of my story, it's the beginning. And for the first time, I believed it.